So for today's webinar, we're going to be modifying and stacking different layers, and we'll be editing and adjusting those composited images all inside ON1 Photo RAW 2019. All right, let's start over here. And if I go into these photos of this beer and the hops and this glass here, if I scroll through these, you can see that they all have different lighting on them. One's focused on the can, one's more focused on the hops and the beer, and then there's others involved as well. So let's go back. And when dealing with layers or multiple layers inside Browse, and let's say you have, these 5 different beer exposures. If we wanted to take all of those inside of the Edit module, we could just go over and we could click Layers. And now this is going to add all of those layers into my Layers pane inside the Edit module. Now we have these different exposures in here, and I was actually playing with this earlier, so I actually renamed these, which was going to be the first thing that we're going to do inside the Edit module here. But let's go through here and let's just take a look at what each of these layers does. So I'm going to go down here and I'm going to turn off all of these, and then we're going to start at this bottom one right here. We're going to name this one Light Can because it looks like all of the light is shining on the can right here. And then we'll see what the second one does. So we'll just turn this one on. And it looks like it's shining light onto the top and then on these hops right here. So we'll just go top of glass, hops. And then this third one, we'll rename that one top of can, glass. Because it's shining a little bit of light right here and a little bit of light on the top of this can. And then the second one. So this is all of the light on these hops right here. So we could just name that one hops right, because it's shining light on the hops on the right side of the frame. And then let's turn this one on and we'll rename that one glass light. Okay. So now we have all of these different layers renamed. So now we're organized a little bit. So we'll start and we'll turn off all of these different layers except for this top of glass hops layer. So we just have this layer right here. And I really like what this is doing to this glass over here, but you can see it's creating a harsh shadow over here on my can. So what I can do is I'm actually going to go in and mask out this layer where I don't want it to appear. And this will allow me to paint in light from this exposure wherever I want it on this composite. So inside of our layers pane here, when we're wanting to deal with our masking options, we're going to click on this little rectangle with the circle in the middle. And when masking, white reveals and black conceals. So this is telling me that this is revealing this entire layer onto my photo. Well, I want to mask this out in specific areas. So I'm going to grab my masking brush. And if you click on your masking options, it's automatically going to grab your masking brush for you. If you're not if your masking brush isn't selected, you can grab it by hitting B on your keyboard. So B on your keyboard for masking brush. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make my brush size a little bit smaller with the left bracket on my keyboard. And I'm going to make sure I'm set to paint out here. And I really like, again, what it's doing to the top of this beer over here and then these hops down here, especially in the front. I could actually rename this. We'll do it front hops glass light. So I know that it's applying this nice light to the front of the hops, and so I don't want to brush that out. But I really want to brush this area out where it's creating that shadow. So I'm just going to brush that out. Oh, my opacity is at 10. So I want to make sure that my opacity is at 100. So now if I brush this out, there we go. Now I'll remove that harsh shadow, and I can paint out that darkness from off that can. So now if I turn this off and on again, I can just keep seeing where I want to paint in or out that light. So it looks like the light on this bottom exposure is coming from this right side, so it's lighting this can right here, and then this left area of hops. So I probably want to paint this out from this left side to preserve some of this light in these hops. So if I paint this out from the left side, you can see it's bringing back in some of that light that was there when we lit this side of the can. And I'll turn it off and on again, just kind of seeing what to do with the exposure. And I really like what that's doing right in here and right over here. I think that's, I'm going to paint this out right there. So I think that looks good as far as our front hops glass light layer goes. Now we can move on to the top of can and glass. So if I turn this off and on, I like what that's doing to the top of this can and also the top of this beer. So we'll just turn this on, and then we're going to brush out. Oops. We want to make sure, so whenever we're dealing with multiple layers inside Photo RAW, and I just made that mistake, is that we tend to stay on the layer that we're modifying before, and then when we go to mask or brush out a different layer, we're still on that same layer. So always remember to click on the layer that you're wanting to mask out, or you'll do like I just did and you'll mask out the wrong layer. So now we have top of can glass selected. So I'm going to mask out quite a bit of this because I do want all of this light to be revealed on the bottom. So I'll just brush all that out. There we go. And now let's see what that's doing. I actually only like it on this can right here, so I'm actually just going to brush this out from this part as well. But now if I turn this off and on, just kind of tones down the top of that can a little bit. So now it's more evenly exposed there. So now we can move on to our hops right. Wow, so that obviously does a lot to kind of light up these hops right here, but it removes a lot of that light from our beer. So we'll click on that hops right again. We're gonna use our masking brush, and then we're just gonna brush out the areas where we don't want that to be applied to. Oops, don't want that much removed. Do want to keep a little bit of this light in here. And then we'll remove this top because it's kind of darkening that up there. Oops, I don't want too much of that removed. Probably good right there. Off the can. And then if we turn this off and on, brings a little bit of light in here, kind of tones down that hop back there, and then brings a little bit of that light into the beer. And then this top part here, this glass light layer, is going to bring the rest of that light into here. So now if I turn this on, you can see I have a ton of light coming into this area now. So let's go in and we can blend this area right into the beer to give that light, or to give that glass of beer a nice kind of soft light inside of it. So we'll make sure we have that glass light layer selected. And then we're just going to brush out everywhere except, oops. Just going to brush this little area off right there. There we go. And then we'll go down here. We obviously want it off our can. We want it off all of these hops around here. And then I'm going to paint it off some of these hops. And then if I want to remove it, I have these kind of highlighted areas on these hops right here, but I can actually remove it from them if I wanted to, so they're not such harsh lights on there. Actually, I'll kind of leave that. I actually kind of like those. But we'll tone them down a little bit. So I'll go to my opacity and I'll lower it to about 59. So now I'm not masking out as much from this top glass light layer. I'm only using an opacity about 60%. So it's only going to remove about 60%. But I'm just trying to remove it so that it's not just, you can see there's the shadow here where I was painting in, or I was putting the flashlight up to this beer. So there's a shadow right there on these hops. So I don't want that too intensely strong, but I do like how a little bit of that light is playing on these hops. Oops. And I kind of painted over the beer, so I'll just go back to paint in, and then I'll just paint that back in. And then I'll go up and remove it from this one. There we go. So now if I turn this top one off and on, that does a lot to add to this kind of the richness and the color of the beer in the glass. So now we've basically finished our composite. We have all of our different exposures kind of blended how we want to. So now what we should do is we should merge these together in a way that we can actually modify them non-destructively. So a great way to do that is to just right click any of these layers, and we're going to select new stamped layer. So new stamped layer is going to take all of these layers right here, it's going to duplicate them, and then it's going to merge those duplicates together. So I'm going to have a merged composite of all of these different photos, but it's going to stay, but all of these different layers are going to stay right there, so I can go back and modify them if I want to. Okay, so now we have just our composited image right here. And I'm just going to turn off all of these different exposures of light, and then we'll just turn this one off and on. So this is our base exposure, the first exposure the light can. So if I turn this off and on, see how much better that looks? We've lit up all these nice hops down here. We have this light coming through the beer, and now we can actually read the can a little bit better. So now we should go in and we'll crop this photo. So I'm just going to C on my keyboard to grab my crop tool. And yeah, let's use a nice 16:9. And I'll just pull this up a little bit to just remove a little bit of that front table right there. And then I think I can just hit enter, or let's make sure it's level on the back. So I'm just grab my level tool, drop this on the horizon line. It's not really on the horizon line. Perfect. So it's a pretty level photo to begin with. So I'll just hit enter. So for this photo, I'm actually going to go into effects. I'm just going to start out with a tone curve. So I'm going to go into add filter. I'm going to click curves. And inside this tone curve, I'm going to head down and I'm going to create a basic S curve. And what basic S curves do is they create contrast and then they boost highlights. So they add just like a little bit of a stylistic look to your photo without modifying it too much. So watch as I go down. So in my shadow tones, which is this little area in here between my midtones and my blacks, I'm going to grab my shadow tones and I'm just going to pull down on it a hair, just a little bit. And then I'm going to head up to my highlight area, which is this region in here, and I'm going to pull up on it to bring out the highlights. And it's just kind of this subtle movement between each of these, and you can really balance out the look of this photo and pull out some of the highlights so that it's not so flat and boring. Maybe add a little bit more contrast. And then let's go with just a mid-tone boost. Okay, I think that looks pretty good. Yeah, that looks pretty good so far. So the next filter I want to add, I actually want to modify a little bit of the color in this shot. So I'm going to add a filter, and I'm going to add split toning. And the reason I'm using split toning is because I can modify this kind of bright highlighted area and then this can of beer kind of in one short swoop. So for my highlights, I know I want kind of this bright orange. So I'm just going to click my color dropper. I'll drop it on this orange right here, and then I'll make it all the way bright. And then I'm going to head down to my amount slider, and I'm going to pull that up so that it's really intense. There we go. Perfect. And then the can's not so blue either. And we're actually going to deal with the can next. So we're going to go down in here, and I'm going to click shadows, and I'm going to use my color dropper, and I'm going to drop it on this blue color in the can. And we're going to pull it up right about there. So now we can play with the amount again. And don't worry too much about this area surrounding the cans, because we're actually going to go in and use a mask to actually just apply it to this area within the glass and the can right here. So if I turn this off and on, I like how that adds kind of a stylistic look and evens out the tones of this image. It removes some of that really bright blue in that can right there, but it's obviously applying it to the entire photo, and it's taking a lot of that green out of our hops. So let's go in here and we're just going to hit M on our keyboard. That's going to grab me my masking bug. So with my masking bug selected, I'm going to use a shape here. I'm going to use edges. So I'm going to drop this down. And so now the split tone filter is only being applied to the area within this mask right here. So if I turn this off and on, you see it's just applied to that little area right there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of flatten this out and align it with this streak of light right here. Just like that. And I'm just going to put it kind of in between these two cans. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. And then I'm going to pull this up. To feather it. And now if I turn this off and on, see how that, I mean, it applies a little bit of these hops right here, but we're kind of focused on the can right there anyway. So it's not a bad thing if we have these hops toned down a little bit in front of this can and this glass. But you can see it does a good job of removing some of that blue color cast from this can and also enriching this color in this glass right there. So let's add one last filter here. I'm going to go in and I'm actually going to add a vignette. And let's just use Big Softy. And we'll actually tone this down quite a bit here. And we're going to grab this little centering icon and I can drag this around and I can put it wherever on the beer that I want to. So I'll just put it right in the middle there where these two are. And then I can pull up down the opacity a little bit. Sweet. And I think one thing we could do here is we could actually bring out a little bit of the exposure just in this can right there. So let's actually use a local adjustment. I'm gonna use lighten, and I'm gonna cool this down. I think this trail right here is getting a little bit orange or yellow right in there. So I'm gonna cool this down a little bit. And I'm gonna hold down Shift and hit K on my keyboard. That's going to grab me my adjustable gradient. And now I'm just going to drop this down. Again, we're on that edges shape so that this middle of the mask is the only place that the adjustment is applied to. And then I'll just flip this around. Make it quite small. And remember, you want to control your color in here. So obviously that's looking a little bit too yellow. That's looking a little bit too cold. So let's pull this up. Maybe that's a little bit too bright here. There we go. I think that looks pretty good as far as just a little bit of a exposure boost for that can. There's a large tonal area in the sky and it's really separated from the background here. So the first thing we need to do whenever we're doing a simple sky swap is we need to develop the base tonality of our base photo first. And more often than not, we're going to go back and change that tonality, but it just helps to see where you're masking if you set the base tonality first. So let's start. We'll go into develop here. And I'm actually going to go and let's see about a camera profile change. Yeah, let's use ON1 Portrait. And for this area in here, we're going to want to add in a little bit of contrast. Just a hair. And then we'll pull up on our midtones, which is going to boost this area in here as well. And we'll leave our shadows how they are. And then what we're going to do is we're going to pull up on our whites, because that's going to make this area up top just kind of this big blob of white, which is actually good if we're trying to replace the sky, because then we can use a color range mask in here to just strictly apply it to this tonal area. And we probably don't need our whites that much. And remember, we can always go back and redefine these adjustments, but for now I think this is pretty good, just base exposure. So to add a new layer, we're going to go into our layers pane here and we're going to click this plus icon. So whenever you click that plus button, it's going to take you to your extras pane, and I just went into ON1 extras, backgrounds, and skies. So I'll head down here. And I'll use one of my favorite skies, which is the Skies 50. And so now that I've added that new layer, one quick thing that I do is I'll hit V on my keyboard. So V is going to grab my transform tool. So with this transform tool, I can move my layer around. I can rotate the layer. I can resize it. I can change the scale of the layer. So the V grabs your transform tool, and a really, really handy tool if you're wanting to move your layer around or modify it quickly. So I'm just going to move this over, and I'm going to make it a little bit bigger so that I can cover all of that sky that I'm trying to replace. Pull that down here. And then I'll actually lower the opacity just a little bit just to see if it's covering all of the areas it needs to cover. Let's just no, I think that looks pretty good. Just going to leave it at that. So we're going to take this sky layer. We're going to drop it below our base layer. So now I just have this base image above the sky layer. So the next thing we need to do if we're doing a sky swap is just click on that base layer, and I can just rename this base layer. Then we'll go in, and in this masking options, we're going to head down to color range mask. So if we click on color range, it's going to create a mask for us based off of this color right here. What we need to do is grab this color dropper. We can pick this color in the sky. And since it's doing the opposite of what we want it to do, it's literally removing this building, we need to invert the mask. And now we have this simple sky replacement right here. And this is where adjusting the developed tones and colors come into play, because we need to go in and modify this sky layer, but we also need to go in and modify this base layer to match those tones in the sky. Well, one quick fix, if you're seeing a lot of these halos around your sky, is you probably have a much darker sky than your base layer. So if I go up to my sky layer here and I click on it, the cool thing about Photo RAW is we can actually modify layers individually. So if I click on the sky layer, I can modify the tonality of it without affecting that base layer. And see how even just pulling up on the exposure allowed it to blend in a lot better with these trees and such. So this is kind of that balancing act of, pulling the exposure up on this and the midtones down on that. So we'll just go to this base layer real quick, and I'm actually going to pull back on the exposure a little bit. And the reason I'm pulling back on the exposure is I'm going to see if I can darken this sky layer a little bit more. So I'm going to pull up on the midtones so I don't affect the overall exposure. I just want kind of these middle gray tones in this building to be pulled up. And then let's go back to our sky layer and let's pull back on that exposure a hair more. Maybe that's not a ticket. Yeah, let's go back to our base layer and we'll just go back to that exposure we had. That was looking pretty good. So now if we zoom in here, I'm going to hit Z on my keyboard. That's going to grab me my zoom or my move tool. So I'll just zoom into this area in here. And I'm not going to really talk about the refine tools today. Instead, this is just more of a simple sky swap, which you could easily do if you have a large kind of tonal area like this. But in this sky, in my base layer, if I view my mask here, if I head down to that color range, if I pull up on this color range, see how it's removing some of the edges around there? So now I don't really have much of that white. And honestly, if you pull up on this, it looks a little kind of janky right now. Maybe we could pull back on a little bit more. But if you actually merge these two layers together and then stylize this photo, people probably couldn't tell that this was a sky swap in here, because you're not going to really notice that area unless you're the one masking it out. And this area looks a little bit blown out anyway. So I think that looks okay as far as just like the base exposure goes for the sky swap. And the next thing that you should do, or I would recommend doing for a simple sky swap, if you've already kind of brushed in the sky or removed this large tonal area, is hit B on your keyboard, make your brush size quite big, and lower the opacity to like 10. And then hold down Shift, hit X, that'll switch your brush mode to paint in. So now I'm painting in my base layer, but I'm painting it in with a really low opacity. So now I can just brush this over these areas where it looks a little bit unrefined. And I can make it look a little bit better just gently and gently with this brush. So now let's go up and we'll do the same thing we did earlier. I'm going to right click and I'm going to click New Stamped Layer. So again, it's going to duplicate these two layers together and then it's going to merge them. So I have a third layer, that composited image with these two, and then I'm going to have these layers there, see, so that I can go back and modify them if I want. So let's rename this Composite. And now we can actually modify this entire composite. We can modify the tone and color. What I'm actually going to do is just go into effects here. And I know I do this a lot, but I love the LUTs filter and it's such an easy way to stylize photos. So if we head in here, I could add a LUTs filter and watch as I just go through all of these. I mean, any of these will probably do, but even that one, I think that one looks pretty good like that. But just hitting the / key on your keyboard, it's really helped to just stylize this entire photo so that it's not so composite looking. And let's see if there's a few more. I know there's a few more in here that would look good on here. Even the black and white looks pretty good. I actually like that. So now we'll head up to our composite here. I'm going to turn off this bottom sky layer and I'm going to reset this base layer. So now watch as I turn this composite layer off and on. I mean, it's not crazy sky swap, but most of the time you don't need a crazy sky swap, because if it's just this large tonal area and everything's kind of well exposed anyway, it's going to look fake if you put just a really dramatic sky right in there. But even this just little color in there, it definitely helps. And I think I could probably go, and we don't need that much vintage matte on here. There we go. That looks pretty good, just like that.